Hi, in this video I will explain how to read an Excel sheet from SharePoint. So recently I did a similar video which I will put the link in my description that is similar to this, but the only difference is I use the OneDrive. So drag and drop the file in OneDrive, then create the table dynamically and read the contents dynamically. It's exactly the same process, but here instead of OneDrive, I'm going to use the SharePoint. Okay, so let's start building the flow. So for that, my trigger going to be here is when a file is created in a folder. Next step, we need to use the Office 365 groups, send an HTTP request. Okay, we need an endpoint, and I'm going to try this endpoint here. So that's sites root drives filter name is equal to test doc library. So what we're trying to do here is I'm going to rename this. I'm going to add a note here saying get document library ID. That's the plan. Okay, so that means I need to get the ID of the test AJ doc library. I'll show you my library. That's the document library name. So I need to get the ID first. So for that, I need to use the Graph API. So in this video, we are going to utilize the Graph API to do this. Okay, so my plan is then to filter the name is equal to test AJ doc library. Okay, let's save the flow and test this. Okay, so I deleted the file earlier and just drag and dropped this file now. Okay, and I'm going to use my previous run also, one of the previous runs I had. Okay, let's see. Okay, so the file is drag and dropped into SharePoint. The flow is triggered, and we got this. But one thing I noticed here is, see, I get all the document library details here. Even though I said in my URL, the endpoint is filter name is equal to that, it kind of ignored that. I don't know why. If somebody knows why it is, please let me know. Okay, so let's remove that then. I don't think the filter is not going to work. So instead of instead of that, then we got another way to work that. That is the filter array actually. Okay, filter array step. For that, we need to use the body, but inside the body, just map the body and copy that, remove that, go to the expression, paste that. So we know that body of send HTTP1, but what I want is I want the value here because that's where my all my contents is. Okay, from there, I'm going to use another function to get the name filter. So that's item question mark single quotes name. Name is equal to test doc library. Okay, test it again. So it should filter now. Let's see. Okay, file ran successfully. So you can see here, see the body value I put in my filter array earlier in my expression. So that's the body and that's the value, which is an array also. So here that is filtered only my document library only. So you can see here test AJ doc library here. I am after this ID actually. Okay, we got that now. So let's go back. See, that's a syntax. Body, previous action name, step name, question mark, value, because that's where the array starts. Right, so the next step is get the document library name then. So for that, add another compose. Okay, and rename this to SharePoint uh, document library ID. Okay, so look in the data because this filters only one array of the value. So we can say the first element of the body of the filter array ID I want. Okay, because that's the easiest way to do it. Here it is. Instead of using a past JSON or something like that, So I'm assuming the value will be there when we filter it, and then we are using the first element of that array value. So let's test this and see. Okay, so flow ran successfully. So remember, in this filter, we got the ID we want. We got the data we want. From there, because I said we need to use the first because it's only one array only here. That's the reason. And from there, we are going to get this ID. Yeah. So that's what this step is, this combo step we added. So here it is. We got the ID there. That's the ID we got here. Yeah. Is that clear? Hopefully that is clear now. So that's the first. And remember, that's the body value earlier I said. Yeah. Okay. So far, good. The next step we need to do here is we need the Excel ID. Okay, let's just go back here. So now we got the ID of the document library. We want now the Excel file ID. That's the next task we need to do. Again, for that, we need to use another send HTTP request, the graph API again. So copy to my clipboard, new step, my clipboard, and copy that. So that's my second request now. Remove that and add the note again and say get Excel ID. That's the file ID we want. So for that, we want to use another endpoint. So that's endpoint. Okay, let's explain a little bit about here. So the syntax is almost up to here is right. And from here, you need to change your domain name .sharepoint.com. Then the drives, then the output of my SharePoint document library. That is this, that ID slash. From there, I want to get everything but name is equal to the file name which is from the trigger name, so that I can get that ID and the name. Okay, hopefully that makes sense because that library can have more than one file, so we need to filter only the triggered file name only. That's the reason. Hope that makes sense. Good. Try to run it again. Okay, so we got the ID, and the second request you can see is substituted with that ID here. See, drives slash that ID, then filtering with the triggered name. That is a file name. Here it is. So under the show row output, we got the ID and the name here. So that's the ID and the name we are after for the below steps. So we want to get the ID of the Excel file. Right. So again, I'm going to use two combos here. Right. So for that, I'm going to add compose, rename to Excel ID, and another step again, compose. I'll come back to you later for that, what we need to map. Rename that to Excel file name. Okay. And under the Excel file ID, we need to use, this is the syntax we need to use here. So from the body of the previous output of the request, that is 2_2 that, and the value from there getting the ID then. So that's the syntax. I'm going to put all the expressions below in my video. Okay. So copy that again. We need to use that for the file name also. So that's done. The next one again, the function. And here I am going to use the name. That's it. Okay, run again. Okay, flow ran successfully. Let's see the file name. So we know that, see, that's a body and the value of the array. Then from there, we want to get the ID and the name. So that's the expression I given earlier. So instead of, putting a past JSON step, you can directly use the expressions. So some of the expressions are quite powerful actually. So here it is. So the Excel ID and the file name we got. Okay. Yes, we should have avoided this mapping here because we already got the file name from the trigger name also, but I just added that there. Okay. So if you want, you can ignore this file name here. Right. The next step. So we got now the Excel file name and the Excel file ID. So what we need to do here is in Power Automate to read the contents of the Excel connector. for the Excel connector, we need to create a table. So if I open this file, see there is no table here. And so creating the table, we want to know the range of the values here. So there is a header here and there is a range here. So that's B3 and A1 to B3, that's the range here. Okay. So how do we do that? Let me close that. So for that, again, we are going to use another HTTP request. As I mentioned earlier, we are going to use lots of Graph API call here. Okay, this is the next one, right? And edit node and say get use the range of the Excel file. So for that, I'm going to use another endpoint. That's the endpoint I'm going to use. Okay, I'll explain it again that. So again, sites, change this with your domain name .sharepoint.com. Then the drives, then the document library ID we added earlier in the previous combo step here. Then items, then slash the file ID, which is Excel underscore ID. That is this. That's the reason we executed this send HTTP request two-step to get the ID. So what we are doing here is with that document library ID and the Excel ID, then along with that, we need to extend again with the slash workbook slash worksheet in brackets sheet 1 used range values only equals true. So remember the sheet 1, why I hard coded the sheet 1 here is, let me open it. By default, in Excel file, it's going to be a sheet 1. But if you got a specific name, you need to mention that. Okay. So in this case, I'm using the default name. Okay. And now try to run that and see what we are going to get. Yes, that's good. Flow runs successfully. Now see the endpoint worksheet use range 1 with all the IDs. We given the ID of the SharePoint document library and also the file Excel file ID. That's the endpoint we used here for. And then see, we got the address A1 to B3. That's the address has been used. So let's open that Excel sheet and see A1 to B3. That's the range. So we got that now. So now what we want is, I'm after in the body, I'm after the A1 to B3. That's the value I want to use for my next step. So the next step, what I need to do here is going to add another compose step and another expression also. So adding a compose step, okay, let's rename that to Excel value range. That's one we are after. Okay, and for that, we need to use another function, or I mean expression, and that's one, two, I think it's a three, is it? Yeah. 3. So for that, the format I shown earlier here is an exclamation mark. So I'm using a split to get the last value so that I can just get the range. So remember, that's the syntax you need to use. So I'm splitting the value from the address, and I'm only interested in the after the exclamation mark of that value, which is the range actually. That is A1 colon B3. Okay, done that, and run the flow again. Right, let's see. So here, remember, that's the address, and that's the one I split. This value I'm splitting using the last, and the split using the delimiter as the explanation I mentioned earlier. So I should be able to get A1 colon B3 in the next combo step. Here it is. Okay. Next, we need to use we need to read the, now we can create the table and read the contents. Okay. So for that, again, going back to here, adding a new step. So remember here we said get the used range. The next step is to use the Excel connector, we need the table. So we are going to create the table. So creating the table, for creating the table, now we got the document library ID. We got the file ID, the Excel file ID, and also we got the used range. Using these three information, we can create a table. Okay. So let's go back to my clipboard and send an HTTP request again. And remove that. That's another syntax. Next syntax I'm going to add here that. Okay, let's explain again. So again, remember to change the domain name, then the drives that document library ID and the Excel ID, then worksheet table slash add. That's the new syntax we want. And the most important thing is this is a post operation. And under the post operations, we need to set the body also. So that's the body we need to set. With the two curly brackets, address and the output of the Excel value range we got from the previous step. So using this, we should be able to, create the table dynamically now. Okay, so from here, from this step, we can get the ID of the um, Excel sheet. Sorry, the ID of the table. That's what we want. From this step, we will get the table which we are going to add. We want the ID also. Okay. Let's add a note and say here create table. Right. Okay, so next step, I'm going to add a combo step. And here, what we want is we want to get the Excel table ID. I'll run the flow in a minute. I just want to add this. Otherwise, I need to delete the file and do it again. If we already going to run the flow, it's going to create the table. And then rest of the below steps, I need to drag and drop the file again. So I'm just going to avoid that now. So rename this Excel table ID. So for that, the function we need to use here is this. The Excel step here, it should be the third one, is it? Yeah, I think it's the third one or fourth. Oh, sorry, it's a fourth one, the last step, fourth. Yeah. Okay, so what that's doing is from the previous step, let's see that. From the previous step, when it creates a table, I want the ID of the table. That's what that ID means. Okay, that's why Excel table ID. So using that, what we could do now is, using all that information, I can use an Excel online business and say list rows present in a table. And let me correct my connection there. And then look for the table. The table which I want to use. Sorry, the location I want to use, not the table. So that's my SharePoint site name. For some reason, I can't select it directly that. Okay. What we could easily do there is I could say add a custom item and type my name then. So that is spinhope.sharepoint.com. So I'm going to dynamically place that now. And then the next one is a document library. And that we know that it's a test aj doc lib. We are using it for the demo, remember? That's the document library. Yeah. Okay. And then the file name. Okay. The file name is, we need to put dynamically again that. Put a slash and then look for the output because there are lots of combos we used. We need to use the file name here. So that's the file name, Excel file name. That's the output we want. Okay, that's done. Then again, the table also we want to use it. Yeah. Okay. So for the table, again, we need to set add a custom item, then select and see Excel table ID. That's the last one. So the Excel table ID we need to map. So we got everything we want now. So see here it says custom value. It doesn't show here as a mapping for some reason. Okay, so don't worry about that. Once you set the value, it is going to say it's a custom value there. Okay, now hopefully just before that, make sure that this file we used here, I drag and dropped earlier, so that file hasn't got a table here. Okay, let me close it. And I'm going to use the last previous run anyway. So I can avoid drag and drop another file and waiting for the trigger as well. Okay, let's see. Right, looks like a flow ran successfully. See that the Excel the table has been created here with that range. That's for this step done, and we are getting the ID. Remember, I'm getting the ID from here, which is this ID. That's the table ID, and that's the table ID is the one which we got here. See that? See, both are correct. That's the expression I used. And then the list rows present in a table. Everything is dynamic. I set the location dynamic, which I can't able to find from the list for some reason. So I set that as a dynamic. And the document library name is, we know that's which document library is, that is from the trigger. And then the file name, which is dynamic, and the table name is dynamic. See, and then we got the content, and which I got Ajit and Smith. There are two records in that. So if I go back and open the flow now, sorry, that SharePoint file now. So here it is. See, it's created a table now. You can see it's created a table, and I got two rows there, one and two. Okay. So that's the way you build the flow utilizing the Office 365 connector graph API. It is quite powerful in these situations, and hope this video is useful, and thank you for watching.